Doug Mastriano because you think it's a better race for you. It's like, I mean, talk about against the public interest. You're like, these people are a threat to democracy. Let's spend millions of dollars boosting them and make it so that they actually get to the general, because like that's, I mean, you can see the logic in this perverse two-party system. It's like, well, I want a quote unquote more beatable opponent, or I want a weaker opponent, but you're playing with fire.
Yeah, and I also think that, with two political parties as we have now, obviously both parties believe that the other one is worse for the country. Like that's just how you'd be a Democrat if you thought the Democrats were better for the country. So you're not, so you're a Republican, and those are your only two options. But I think that
Oh yeah, how many times do Forward Party members get accused of being Republicans because we're not Democrats? I mean, that's like freaking every 10
yeah,
seconds.
yeah, and
Meanwhile, the majority of the country is independent.
yeah, even the Republicans and Democrats who are still in the parties are not particularly happy with those parties. I think the numbers are hovering in like bouncing between 60 and 80%, which sure, it's over 50%, but if 60% of your party thinks that you are terrible, if 60% of your group thinks you're terrible, you're probably not a great group to begin with. So, maybe look at yourself for a little while. But I also think that having the two-party system that we currently have with the two parties we have really makes both parties kind of end up in a bad position where, since the other party is existentially bad for the country, anything you can do to beat them is okay. And that's how we end up in these situations where the Democrats are elevating just Republican candidates that would be completely unacceptable, completely unqualified, completely all of that. Because, of course, we should do anything we can in order to win, not even recognizing that you've now, first off, put the country at risk of those people getting elected. But second off, you've lost your moral core. You're not actually fighting for what's best for the country anymore. I feel like the country as a whole has kind of lost that moral core. The parties have lost that moral core, and we really need to take some time together to define that again, so that we're operating within the bounds of creating a good place to live, rather than just not letting the other party take us in a direction that we view as horrible.
Well, I think this is the darkest part of the two-party system, Matt, which is that increasingly what happens with people, families, and communities totally irrelevant politically. Because hey, you're stuck with us in this blue area or this red area, so I can screw up or not screw up, and it doesn't really matter. We have a re-elect rate of 94% as incumbents because we've carved the country up like a turkey, and you can't get rid of us. And so when someone comes to me and says like, "Hey, my town's busted, my neighbors are addicted to drugs, my kids' schools are closed," you look at it and being like, "Well, doesn't really matter because you can't really do anything about it. And we don't actually understand how to do anything about it as a political party, because all we know how to do is talk about how the other side's bad, and argue. And that's our set of incentives. We're essentially a bunch of communicators and inflamers. And what happens in your community doesn't matter. I can't tell you how many political figures who speak in this language, and like no one actually cares about what's happening on the ground in real life to people and families. It's just become an elite communications competition, as opposed to anything that's going to change people's lives for the better.
Yeah, one of the things that somebody who works here at Ford brought up that I thought was really interesting is that, you go back 30, 40, 50 years, the number of comms staffs in any member of Congress's office, single digits, one, two, maybe three comms professionals. Now it's like 50% or something ridiculous like that. I forget the actual number, but as you said, it's
But most members of Congress at this point are primarily media figures and theater performers, and they're not legislators.
yep.
A member of Congress said to me that if you are in Congress and you're in the minority party, you're essentially a piece of furniture. Like you're not consulted on anything, you're never going to pass anything. So what do you do if you are full time and you're like, okay, I have to elevate my political profile. So like let me try and figure out how I'm going to do that, even in a world where I'm certainly not going to pass anything meaningful.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll propose some messaging bills and say like, oh, like I stood on this, I fought for this. Maybe I'll try and get on cable news like that. That's the coin of the realm.
Yeah, and I think this also goes back to something we were talking about a little while ago too, with the parties have kind of established their policies as the defining features of themselves. And so if they're wrong about one of those and they actually do manage to implement something and it doesn't work out, you can't move around from that because you're defined by that policy. So, like, what are you going to do now? Well, you're just going to keep on doubling down and saying, oh, well, you know, the problem is we didn't invest enough resources in that, or the problem is that the other party sabotaged it, or whatever. And then you end up just kind of doubling down on failed policies instead of saying, like, hey, we tried this, it was wrong, but what's really important to us is that our communities are safer. So instead of going in this direction even more, let's reevaluate it. Let's find other ways to make our community safer and let's move in that direction. And that's where I think you really need ideological diversity in these conversations, because other people are going to have good ideas that you wouldn't think of based on your own background. Like, there's plenty of areas out there where, based on my background, I would put forth certain ideas that would be terrible, probably. Like, I'm not a policy expert. I'm not the person who you should put in charge of all the policies in the country, because I've got my biases. And if I'm not having them tested by other people or challenged by other people, if I'm not hearing ideas brought up by other people, it's going to be wrong. You get this echo chamber, and that's how you end up kind of where we are now in the country, where the two parties just can't believe that they are wrong because there's nobody in the room saying we might be wrong, because everybody just agrees with each other or gets cast out if they don't.
So we've talked about the local officials, very exciting. We talked about some of the congressional races. There are others, opportunities in November that we can get into right now. But then there's the big elephant in the room, 2024. What the heck is going on? So I want to discuss for a moment something you have not heard, Matt, but it's going to be fun and exciting. I had dinner with a very, very significant uh, philanthropist last week who said that she sat in on and managed, actually, I think she funded them, a number of focus groups for groups of Obama, Trump, Biden voters, the genuine swing group. They voted for Barack Obama in 2012, Donald Trump in 2016, and then they said, screw that, Joe Biden in 2020. This group comprises approximately 6% of the electorate, which in this narrowly divided country is going to decide most any election. I think people sense, you get 6% swinging one way or another.
That's like 20 million voters.
Yeah, it's tens of millions of voters. So these focus groups had a number of insights. These people are very, very upset about how things are going right now. They're really not enjoying this administration, shall we say. They were asked to describe each party in one word. And they actually pretty quickly coalesced around one word for each party. What word do you think that they used for the Democratic Party?
Ineffective.
Preachy.
Okay, that makes sense too.
What word did they come upon for the Republican Party?
I don't know what this podcast is rated, so I don't know what type of language I'm allowed to use here.
It's rated adult, but the word was crazy.
Okay, I was going to say batshit was where I was going. So
Yeah,
same
no,
world.
yeah, I think batshit was right there. So I think that these swing voters are onto something with both these parties. They were then presented with a choice saying you have to choose either preachy or crazy. And which do you think they chose?
I am going to say that they went with crazy.
They went with crazy by an overwhelming margin, 90% plus, which was mildly surprising when I heard this. But they really, really detest preachy.
Yeah.
They don't like crazy, but they'll choose it if they have to.
People don't like being talked down to or condescended to. I think, like, that's kind of, I was bringing up the criticism before of the people are too stupid to figure out ranked choice voting, kind of the same thing. Like, there's just a whole lot of talking down to the American people instead of just leveling with them out there. So that makes sense. That group's also interesting to me because we've talked before about kind of the Obama Trump voters, because you had a decent number of them supporting you in the presidential. I think the way that you categorize them made a lot of sense. Of they were banking on change. Like, Obama promised change, Trump promised change. They didn't have their lives going in the right direction, and then you know they voted that way. But to vote for Biden at that point suggests that there's a level of change.
Biden was change in
Really,
2020,
that
Matt.
is true. Yeah.
Biden was the change. He was like, okay, this isn't working. Let's try the other horse. But they are very, very ticked off. And a lot of these folks um, are struggling with some of their day-to-day financial
Yeah.
constraints, and inflation is really hitting them hard. So they are very, very upset about what's going on. Now, the 2024 field, I think it's going to be Trump and the Republican Party. There's a lot of noise about DeSantis. I don't think DeSantis decides to risk his entire political future by going up against Trump in a death match. He can easily just coast for a cycle
Yeah.
and wind up in a great place.
He's a young guy. He's got plenty of time.
And I think on the other side, if Trump is running and then Joe Biden says, I'm running, then the Democrats will fall in line pretty quick, even if there are concerns about his age. And there are some people who are very, very unenthusiastic. So right now, the most likely matchup remains Trump Biden 2, despite the fact that 58% of Americans don't want that matchup, don't want either of those men to be president in 2025.
Hmm.
Their combined age will be 159 at that point. It would be a visible manifestation of just how stupid and broken down the two-party system is, where you're like, wait a minute, in a country of 330 million people, we're choosing between these guys again, and they're 4 years older and creakier. I mean, like this would really be insanity.
Yeah.
But guess what, America? Like insanity is still the most likely outcome. And so a lot of people look at Forward Party, and they just reflexively think presidential race because that's the way they're
Yeah.
programmed. They're programmed to say, like, oh, the only reason anyone would get into third parties would be if they're going to run for president. Now, we're not about that. We're about solving the country's problems, giving people a real choice, changing and improving the mechanics, changing the incentives within parties. And we're here for the long haul. That said, uh, the country is not doing well. The field in 2024 could be completely unacceptable to tens of millions of Americans, and we may be able to improve on that. So, I want to present a vision of an independent third party presidential nomination process where we get people of diverse points of view and backgrounds and say, what, you want to run for president? We will give you a fair shake. You can make your case to the American people. And guess what? A political party can nominate candidates any way they want. There is nothing about starting in Iowa and New Hampshire. There's nothing about ignoring major population centers. There are huge swaths of the country that have not had any meaningful input into presidential nominations their entire lives, like they're, for multiple generations. So imagine being able to participate in a real life, vital presidential primary on your smartphone and then have your vote be verified a few days later, when a postcard arrives, or maybe you get a text message and it gets matched, your phone number gets matched up to your public records. But there are ways that we can actually show America what democracy can mean and then come together behind a unity ticket or a third party presidential campaign that genuinely reflects the desires and will of the American people, as opposed to someone who's just managing to trudge along because of seniority within a broken two-party system.
There's a lot of people out there, as you noted, who just structurally are kind of cut out of this process quite a bit. And if you think about the process itself, you know, I think a good proxy for this is the debates, because that's kind of the most visible part of the presidential selection process. Think about how bad our debates are these days.
I can say with authority, they're bad.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. We literally have had debates, presidential debates in this country that we still talk about to this day. Like, you know, you go back to the 1800s and we're still, you know, hearing about Lincoln's debates. So there are better ways to do these things. It's just not going to happen in the current system. So, you know, we've got to break out of that. I think we've talked about this. The media is talking about it at this point. There's a bunch of people who are looking at it. There's going to be independent candidates for president in 2024. There's just way too many people who don't want Biden Trump for that to not happen. There's people out there who have flirted with runs before, who have put feelers out, all that stuff before. There's politicians out there who we know are kind of posturing in ways, or like, oh, I'm not going
There,
to
there
vote
are
for.
an, there are a number of moderate Republicans in particular who are looking at running for president and trying to decide whether they're going to do so within a Republican primary. Which, by the way, they're going to get shellacked. If you have 3 or 4 moderate Republicans versus Trump, they all get crushed because he still maintains loyalty among 2/3 or so of Republican primary voters. Again, your stupid primary system in action, and some of them are looking at running third party.
Well, also, I mean, with the stupid primary system, I think people lose sight very easily because we present the number, like the support for Trump within the Republican Party, we present that as a percentage. But it's a dwindling number of people because more and more people are leaving the Republican Party to become independents. Who stays in the Republican Party at this point? The people who think the Republican Party is a good place to be. And so, you're getting the people who are like, yeah, Trump should be our standard bearer, as the ones who are sticking in the party, and you get the other people leaving. And so, of course, Trump's going to come out of that looking good because the other people have left and they can't vote in the Republican primary since they've now left that party and become an independent. So it's just kind of pushing it in that direction.
Oh well, I'm the math guy, Matt. I spent months and months campaigning in Iowa. You know what percentage of Iowans participated in the Democratic caucus?
What percentage?
6.4. So if I'm sure the Republican number is not that dissimilar. So you're talking about like 60% of the Republican primary voters in one of these states. It's like, you're gonna be looking at probably like 10-20% of people saying like, yeah, we love Trump, and then you're like, oh, half the country loves Trump. It's like, no, actually it's just within the weird Republican primary electorate in a particular location.
Yeah.
If you open it up to the general public, then things change really, really quick, particularly if you give people genuine choices, because right now there are millions of Americans who aren't down with Trump who will never vote for the Democrat because they just hate Democrats or whatever, for whatever reason.
Yep.
Think they're preachy, whatever. You give them another choice, then they'd be like, okay, I'll sign up for that. And the problem is right now that they're stuck, like the entire country is stuck, and we are going to unstick them, to use some of my earlier language. The Forward Party. We're coming to a town near you. This is the most exciting development in American politics. You're talking to the co-CEO of the third biggest political party by resources in the country today, growing enormously all the time. Matt, what are you most excited about? First, thank you again for shepherding a very, very difficult uh, merger across the finish line. How many meetings and calls do you think you had?
It was definitely time consuming and difficult to figure out all the details. But as I've said before, just fantastic people at both of those other organizations who have been great to work with and focused on the right stuff, focused on how to bring us together rather than focused on trying to find ways to make this thing fall apart. So it's been months, it's been hundreds and hundreds of hours of work. But we're at a very exciting point right now where we have finally brought these groups together. We're moving forward. We are going to make a massive change in this country. What I'm most excited about, and this maybe this isn't the best thing to say, but I'm most excited. Like this, when we started this thing up, we were trying to tackle two parties that have just an unbelievable number of resources behind them. And the more people you have, the more likely you can make that happen. Like we're all in this, as you said, nobody's in the third party space because they think it's going to be easy or glorious or any of that stuff. Anybody who's in here is doing it because they think that it's the right thing to do. And with more people, it's more likely that we get the outcome that we want. So I'm super excited to be working with these groups of people, really, really, really smart, dedicated, principled people, in order to make it more likely that we end up coming out of this thing with the country that we want.
You're all those things too, Matt. Smart, dedicated, principled. So thrilled to have you as a partner and colleague in this effort. We're going to make it so that people realize they have actual choice. That we can do better. These two parties are so ripe. I mean, think about every industry that has changed in American life over the last 50 years. And politics has been the exception, and people are getting more and more pissed off about it. It's more and more obvious that these structures are not 21st century ready, that it's time for an upgrade. And you, my friend, are helping to make that upgrade possible. I'm going to leave you with the call to action. How can people help and get involved with Forward Party?
Uh, I I love this question because a lot of the times people think that you need to do it, have hundreds of hours to dedicate to this, or be able to, be a state lead and spend 50 hours a week doing anything, or, find a job. You don't. Just go out and do good in your community. And if people ask, be like, yeah, this is, come learn about the Forward Party. This is what we're about. We're about making communities better. You've got 5 minutes. Give us 5 minutes. If you've got 5 hours, give us 5 hours of just going to your community and making it a better place. And we got a ton of resources put together by some really smart people on our team, particular Blair and Josh, on how to get civically engaged. To me, a leader is somebody who behaves in a way that they would like others to behave. And so just go out and be a leader. Do the things that you think other people should do in your community. You can go from there. I'm going to hijack it a little bit right now, Andrew, to give some shout outs to some of the volunteers, the people who are doing it out there.
Please.
Caesar in Nevada,
Yeah.
who's going crazy on the Final Five voting, fantastic out there, and he's gotten us in touch with a lot of local leaders who are just doing exciting stuff. Leslie's holding down the fort in Florida. Heather and Rick are in Michigan and Texas. We got a 14-year-old high school student named Ryan, who I don't even know how much time it took him to do this, but he put together a list of 2,800 local newspapers for people to write letters to the editor to in order to make the case for the Forward Party. We've got Zach and Gina, Silas, Brandon, Steve, Tina. These are just some of the people out there who are going above and beyond to show their communities that things can be better if we all just believe they can be better. And as you said, like up until now, this has kind of been, there's only 2 games in town, but that's kind of crazy considering how many people are independents out there. Like if we just had the whole country put their heads down and say like, hey, no judgment, like close your eyes, lift your hand if you want a new option, we'd be in the majority today. And yet everybody's just been browbeaten into accepting these 2 parties. So let's stop letting them tell us that we can't form our own group, form our own party, go out there, improve this country, do things a different way, because they are in the minority, not us. So let's go out and act like that.
Yes, let's activate the people, the true majority. I couldn't agree with you more. Just everyone listening to this, just go to Forward Party and try and meet someone in your community, in your state, because you'll be blown away. The folks who are volunteering in this movement are just some of the most uplifting, amazing people I've ever met. And it will make you feel better about the country. It makes me feel better about the country every single day. Thank you, Matt. Forward. Let's take the country there. Appreciate the heck out of you, my
Look
friend.
forward. Same to you, Andrew. Always appreciate talking with you, your perspective, and as always, thanks for bringing me along for this crazy ride.